Hello, and welcome to the Knowing Iron podcast. In this week's episode, I have Peter Osborne from the International Fund for Ireland with me to talk about the significance and impact of peace walls today. So, can you, for those who don't particularly know much about the International Fund for Ireland, could you give us a brief synopsis of what you do?
Will do, Lily, and great to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time to do the podcast with us. The International Fund for Ireland was established nearly 40 years ago, 40 years or so ago, and it is an initiative of both the British and Irish governments coming together from the 1980s to try to invest in peace building, community relations and reconciliation work in Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole. It initially and continues to be funded not just by the two governments, but by support from governments in the United States, in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and initially the European Union as well. Most of the work that we do these days is about building relationships between communities, tackling segregation, and working with young people who don't necessarily fit into traditional youth programs to provide some personal development work.
And when you meet young people who are disengaged and marginalised, what issues do you face on a day-to-day?
Well, I think some of the issues for them are maybe falling outside the formal education system. They may have personal issues that relate to communities or to families or maybe even to their peers and how they engage in some antisocial activities. But I think one of the big issues for them that we try to help address with the groups that we fund and work with is issues of aspiration and confidence. You know, when I meet the young people that we support through the programs, I'm just constantly amazed at how great they are. Actually, their emotional intelligence, their ambition for themselves. But sometimes it's about confidence, and that's true of young people, and anybody from any background. But especially, I think, people from sort of backgrounds that these young people are from, for working class communities, where maybe role models aren't the best at times, and where they see around them, they see around them some things that hold them back rather than help them achieve their potential.
And is there anything you feel that society would lack?
Society? I think one of the things that we try to do in our programs is help communities develop plans and develop ambitions in terms of social and economic progress for their areas that are more advanced or better advanced by communities working together. And when they are not working together in areas of this city or anywhere in Northern Ireland, rural or urban, then they lose some power as communities to achieve certain things for their communities, whether it be around education or employment or any of the social and economic issues that are holding people back. So it's one of the reasons why we do the Peace Barriers program, trying to remove peace barriers that are generally in working class areas, that are areas where there is lower educational underachievement or where there are issues around employment. The more that we can have those communities working across and helping each other, then the better. And the faster that we remove those barriers of segregation between communities and the issues that have traditionally divided them, the better it is for both sides of the community.
How important do you feel it is to involve both sides of the communities? Because I know in working class areas, there's still a lot of segregation. So how important is it that you do, try and get the two communities to, communicate with each other rather than working with them separately?
It's very important at different levels. Is it important? Relationship dismantles prejudice. And so in social terms, about moving a society forward in the next phase of our peace process, to work with people, to develop relationships with each other, to start to trust each other, is a hugely important part of just the overall peace building work of trying to move us from a fairly negative peace where there's an absence of violence into a more positive peace, where there is much more greater opportunities for people, especially within working class communities who have borne the brunt of the troubles, to achieve more for themselves and for their own communities. I think it's important also because when you work in working class communities, especially in areas like inner city Belfast or Derry, Londonderry or Portadown, where the three places where there are peace barriers. It's really important that I think people all understand that the issues in one community are almost exactly the same in the other community. Those issues of low educational achievement, of higher than average unemployment, of issues around mental health and well-being, they're exactly the same. And they will achieve better, greater outcomes for themselves if they work with people on the other side of the community, achieving exactly the same, better outcomes on that side of the community too. They are strengthened by working together. And so when you remove barriers between those communities, whether it be issues of trust and lack of relationship, or whether it be physical barriers, the better it is for both sides.
Has COVID impacted these groups or got the cost of living crisis, or has the progress sort of stayed the same?
It's really interesting. I think COVID was a huge challenge, and I don't think you could have imagined it before COVID happened. But what I think we find, and other funders find also, was that the relationships built up between community groups on either side of the community divide here were so strong that they helped each other out. And I think what it said to me was that work has laid a really solid foundation, and it's important. And in times of crisis, that those relationships were sustained and helped to deliver important things to people on either side of the community because they couldn't get out and do things for themselves.
Did you face any challenges during COVID? Like, did you find anyone sort of isolating themselves, or do you think it did the opposite?
There certainly were challenges. So I think the structures and the relationships created helped overcome some of the issues of isolation. But I hear all the time, especially in the work with young people, that it created a huge challenge of how people just continued to develop relationships with each other because you couldn't on a one-to-one basis. And while Zoom and online stuff was great and will be with us forever, it's just not the same when it comes to developing a personal relationship with people. I think there were huge challenges with COVID. I think the isolation that people experienced will be long-lasting. I think it's something that all of us need to think about how we address and just get back to some sort of normality.
And have your programs been restored after COVID?
Yeah, well, they didn't stop. I think like any program of that sort, which is about building relationships between people, they weren't as good during COVID because online isn't as good as face-to-face. So they never stopped. And we were quite keen to make sure that they were sustained throughout the COVID period, and also to even invest a bit more in some of the work that went on, especially with younger people. So they have continued to have sustained, and in the Peace Barriers program, for example, the relationships are strong enough that only last year, which is a year or two after COVID, in the last year, in fact, in the last number of months, there have been major steps forward in the opening of an interface gate at Flex Street in North Belfast for the first time in 40 years or 50 years. That gate has been opened. It's closed every night still, but hopefully there'll be more progress and it can stay open all the time. Some fences were removed around Derry's walls that had been up for many, many years. And of course, in a project called Black Mountain Shared Space, they have begun to dismantle part of that peace wall and put a new centre in place that will be accessible and open to people on both sides of the community. So it's not only that the work has continued over COVID, the results have been delivered as well with some of the interface and peace barrier programs.
And what would you hope to see in the new centre?
Well, that particular centre is going to provide community space. The IFI is one funder amongst others. I should acknowledge funding from the Peace Programme as well as Belfast City Council and others as part of the Department of Justice too. It'll provide some community space and retail space, some income generation for the organisation itself. It will sit on the peace line, so it will have taken away some of the peace line itself and provide access to either side of the community within that peace line. And obviously there'll continue to be relationship building programs between those communities as the centre gets up and running. It's already started to be built. Hopefully it will be built in the next year or so. That's a really great start, and good. Yeah, well done to Black Mountain Shared Space for the work that they've done. It's taken a long time, but it's come to fruition.
And in one of your surveys in 2019, only 3% had concerns about, removing the peace walls. So do you think it is finally time for them to be removed once and for all?
Yeah, I think that the peace process we're in has been incredibly successful. We're 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and this place, you wouldn't remember it, of course, but I remember what this place was like in the 70s and 80s, and it was a dreadful place to live. And comparing where we are now to where were in the 1990s is like chalk and cheese. It is just it's such a different and better place to live in as a city, as Northern Ireland, as Ireland as a whole, with the ending of that conflict. And I don't think we really appreciate how far we've come, because when things change slowly, you don't really see the change, and therefore you don't appreciate it. But there's a massive difference to where we were in the late 1990s. But that's good. But what we haven't done as well as we could is break down the segregation that still exists in this society. And I think that's what will happen in the next 25 years. That's a challenge for the next 25 years. With the peace barriers within housing, where 94%, I think it is, social housing in Belfast is still segregated. And in education, where still 7 or 8% of children go to integrated schools, and the 92, 93% don't. So I think that's the next challenge in the next 25 years is we've come so far, but let's finish the work of what this peace process is about and make this a truly cohesive and non-divided society. And you're right, the surveys that we've carried out indicate that the large majority of people want to see the peace barriers removed in their lifetime, but there are still some concerns exist around safety and around loss and cultural loss, a few other things as well. And those are understandable concerns, and they are the sort of concerns that the projects funded by the fund, an international fund, are working on to build those relationships and trust across the community divide to try and reduce, minimise and take away those concerns, to create the conditions for the reimagining and the removal of the peace barriers. And I think you probably need to get to a critical mass where the progress of taking these walls down get to a stage where people realise this is for the good, rather than something that we need to be worried about in terms of the removal of the walls.
And since the survey, which was done in 2019, there have been riots in Belfast since that. For example, in 2021, where a bus was set on fire. Do you think any attitudes have changed since the survey?
I think attitudes change year by year depending on the politics and the current circumstances of things. Building the peace takes a long time, and it will take 50 years and more. During those 50 years and more, we will have little times that are more stressful and more challenging, but we will continue to make progress. And so, yes, you have seen through the 90s and the 2000s and 2010s and now in the 2020s, moments that have been really challenging. I think they are becoming less often and less challenging. There will be further moments that are challenging. There may be further disorder at times. But if we keep our eye to the long-term strategic goal of building this peace as a positive peace, removing the barriers and developing relationships, then I think we'll eventually get there and not get too down about a short period that looks negative where there is some violence. These are things that will happen in a peace process, and we just manage them and we move on and we continue to improve.
What do you think needs to be done in order to maintain the changes that the International Fund for Ireland and others bring in?
We need to understand the long-term nature of this and continue to invest within communities and with funds that continue to support cross-community work and relationship building work. And if we do that, combined with the policy changes that we need to make as well, and we just continually improve things, we're going to get there. This is going to be a really good, positive piece that we have that there certainly won't be any turning back on.
And loads of young people in university don't really think about, the external donors such as the EU and the US. But how important are these donations from these countries to Northern Ireland?
Oh, they're very important. And it's not just the donations. The fact that other governments and other countries, the fact that the Congress in the United States, for example, is continuing to invest in peace building in Ireland, North and South, including Northern Ireland, through the international fund and in other ways, is just a huge encouragement to people. That international recognition of the importance of the work, but also the importance of the need to finish the job, continue to pay attention and invest in peace building is really important. The hard cash is equally important, of course, and it's terrific that the US Congress is actually putting more money into the International Fund than it did a few years ago, because that directly allows us to do the work that we do across the community divide to try and remove the peace barriers, but also the work that we do with young people, investing in those young people that are the future of this place. And I can take this opportunity maybe just to say thank you to the US government, to the Canadian, the New Zealand, the Australian government, the EU for everything they've done for the International Fund, but especially for the two governments. And what a symbol that is that the two governments are working together in putting money into the International Fund for 40 years and more to help this process.
And I noticed Biden, you met Biden a few weeks ago. Had he anything to say about the peace walls?
He certainly had things to say, not specifically the peace barriers, but about the importance of that relationship building work that the International Fund does, including with the young people. And he met some of the young people that were supported by the fund and some of the projects that the fund supports as well.
And one of the other things Biden had said was that the UK government should be working more closely with the Irish government to support the people of Northern Ireland. Would you agree with that?
I agree that the British and Irish governments have a really important role, both separately and working together. And I certainly agree that the British and Irish governments contribute more when they're working together in Northern Ireland because they have a mutual interest.
And just to finish off, in an article published in 2022 by the Evening Standard, your chief, Paddy Hart, stated that the agreement would not have happened without the brave community workers. In another 25 years' time, what do you hope the community workers will achieve?
Paddy's absolutely right in that. I was around when the agreement was concluded and was actually in the room when the agreement was concluded in 1998, and it was fantastic. The agreement itself recognised the importance of civil society as part of the peace-building process. And when you look at real progress on the ground, it is delivered a lot of the time by people within communities doing incredibly brave work, who are very capable people and who have the good of their own community, but every community at heart in the work that they do. What'll be the situation in 25 years? I think they need to continue to do the work that they do. They need to bring on a new generation of leaders within civil society for the next 25 years as well. And I think this work, the more success there is, will get easier to do. One of the things I hope that they do, we need to normalise this cross-community work. We need to stop doing some of the work quietly, and we need to do more in the work loudly so that people across the community divide see that it's a good thing to do and it benefits everybody across the community.
Well, that's all we have time for this episode. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Not at all, Lily. Enjoyed it. Thank you for asking.
Well, stay tuned and we'll talk later.